I'm Zainab Badawi. Welcome to the Emmanuel Centre in London for this Intelligence Squared debate. This weekend, Donald Trump marks his 100th day in office as President of the United States. And what a tumultuous period it's been. We've seen his travel ban on 7 Muslim-majority countries thwarted. Relations with Russia have soured, and his critics have said this has vindicated their fears. But Trump's supporters say, no, not at all. He's made a tremendous impact by reasserting US leadership. For instance, he dropped the mother of all bombs on militants in Afghanistan, and he's fired cruise missiles on Syrian military bases. So how is the 46th President of the United States doing? Well, that is our motion today. Trump is making America great again, and we have an excellent panel for you arguing for the motion. Conrad Black, the Canadian-born financier, historian and former owner of the Telegraph newspapers, and Aaron Banks, a big backer of Brexit in the UK. He was one of the first British politicians to visit President-elect Trump. And arguing against the motion, Keyser Khan, the Muslim-American lawyer and father of the US Army captain who was killed in action in Iraq, and Anne Applebaum, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and columnist on the Washington Post. That is our panel. Welcome to you all. Now, shortly, you will hear from the panelists, 2 for the motion and 2 against. I'm then going to throw open the debate to the floor. Now, you in the audience, you know you were asked to vote as you were coming into the hall before the debate, because we want to know what your thinking is before you hear what our speakers have to say, and then we're going to ask you to vote again when you've heard the arguments for and against the motion to see if any views have been swung. So, let's have the opening statements from the panelists. And speaking first for the motion, Trump is making America great again. Conrad Black, he's former chairman of the Telegraph newspapers and numerous other publications. He's written biographies of Presidents F.D. Roosevelt and Richard Nixon, as well as a strategic history of the United States. Conrad Black, please make your way to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. I will start with facts which I believe are germane to the question as it's formulated, and just cite some statistics. I know that statistics can always be made to prove anything, but in this case, I give you my word that they are objectively selected and are not misleading. In the first 16 years of this new century, the GDP per capita of the United States has grown by 1%. And if it had grown in this period at the rate that it did in the last 20 years of the 20th century, the people, the families and individuals of the United States would be on average 20% wealthier than they are. In this period, 15 million people have fallen out of the workforce. The percentage of Americans above the age of 20 who work has declined by nearly 5 full percent. And the number of hours worked, any kind of legitimate work in the United States in that period has declined by the shocking total of 12%. These are very dangerous figures and a very dangerous trend. And the impact of this is very burdensome to the country, and it's very worrisome to the country. And you must remember that the ethos of the United States is one of such optimism and such ambition that it is not a country accustomed to the concept of decline at any time, and it has never had a period of absolute or comparative decline such as it has had in the last 15 to 20 years. And it very much concerns the whole country. But coming up to the election, it must be said, this was not mentioned by the established elements of either party. It was very little mentioned in the media. And it was really only seized upon by outlier candidates, to some degree Senator Sanders, who is a democratic quasi-Marxist, and on the other side, on the Republican right, Senator Cruz. Now, if you people are startled by Donald Trump, you will really be shocked if you get a good look at Senator Cruz. He's pitched his whole campaign to the corn cobbers and the wool hats and the people with automatic weapons in the rear windows of their pickup trucks. And he, as far as I can see, would hand over the Pentagon to the National Rifle Association. And he declared in Indianapolis last spring that God told him to run for president. And in this last election year, in policy terms, Trump was a moderate. He is in favor of universal health care. It's obviously going to be with some difficulty that he gets there, but he's in favor of it, at least as a concept. And he is in favor of lower taxes for lower income people and higher taxes for higher wealth people. And in policy terms, he's a very reasonable person. The fact that Mrs. Clinton referred to half of Trump's supporters as deplorable was extremely unwise, given that she was, after all, running for the highest office in the country. And these people are worried. And what occurred was an assault by Trump upon the entire political establishment. He ran against all factions of both parties. He ran against practically all the media, almost all of audible and visible academia. He ran against the lobbyists, the polling organizations, the bureaucracy, Wall Street, and quite explicitly, that infestation of useful, to his enemies, idiots in Hollywood. He ran against all of them, and he won. And he has won with a program that is quite radical. He has a tax plan, which I understand he intends to reveal at the end of this week, which will include taxes sharply reduced for all corporations, sharply reduced for lower income groups, tax incentives to start a decades late renovation of national infrastructure, incentivizing $2 trillion of retained profit overseas to return to the U.S. And he has already dismantled the nonsense of global warming. And he has already shown that he will give the country, as has been mentioned, a foreign policy that is neither the trigger-happy belligerency of George W. or the Panglossian fantasy of Obama telling America's enemies and allies to change roles and places. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Conrad Black. Now, the first voice against the motion, Kiza Khan, is a Muslim-American lawyer whose son was killed in action in Iraq. At the 2016 US Democratic Party convention, he denounced Trump's call for a ban on migrants from some Muslim countries and questioned his understanding of the US Constitution. Kiza Khan, please make your way to the lectern.
Good evening. America is discovering the true nature of this president. And the motion is, Trump is making America great again, and I stand before you against the motion. Here are the facts. You remember the very loudly pronounced bigoted statement by candidate Trump was, "I will build the wall and Mexico will pay for the wall." Well, friends, we all know Mexico is not paying for the wall, and the wall is not being built. The reason is that to build the wall, you need funding, and Congress has loudly announced that they will not allocate any funding for the building of the wall. So we are waiting. Remember, the second promise and loudest promise was, we will repeal and replace Affordable Care Act in United States. He promised that during the election campaign, and then he tried, and you saw 3 weeks ago how it was defeated when it went to the Congress. His party is the majority party in the Congress, yet that proposal was defeated. Third, jobs. I will create thousands of jobs in the United States. And where are the jobs? We don't see them. Even in the near future, we don't see them. So that is the job promise. I am a Muslim American. I am a patriotic Muslim American. I consider myself responsible for the safety and security of the United States. We heard Muslim ban number 1 and Muslim ban number 2. You all know where the ban is. Rule of law has prevailed. The fifth and much talked about accomplishment is the appointment of Judge Gorsuch to Supreme Court. He's going to make America great again. No, he's not. Senate rule were changed. Instead of 60 votes, were changed to simple majority. That is the only accomplishment that you know that he had been able to do. Remember, within 100 days, his national security advisor, agent of foreign governments, was disgracefully walked out of White House, was asked to resign. Keep these issues that I mentioned to you. Is this the way to govern one of the most enviable democracy in the world? I oppose this motion. You heard my brief statements, and my story that continues, my journey that continues, is in opposition of Donald Trump, in support of democracy, democratic values, safety and security of my country, safety and security of Europe, safety and security of mankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kazir Khan. Now, our second speaker for the motion is Aaron Banks. He's a former major donor to UKIP, the UK Independence Party, and co-founder of Leave.eu. He recently quit UKIP to set up a new populist political force called the Patriotic Alliance, whose aim is to bring Trump-style politics to the UK. He's also launched the anti-establishment news website Westmonster, which is modelled on the American websites Breitbart and the Drudge Report. Aaron, please make your way to the lectern. Thank you.
Good evening. I just want to tackle the last point that the last speaker made. As a businessman, to achieve anything in 100 days is pretty much impossible, let alone make America great. So I think Donald Trump has set out to actually do the things he said he was going to be elected to do. The fact that the establishment, both in the Republican Party and elsewhere, have tried to stop him, is not an indictment of his presidency after 100 days. But what I wanted to do was reel back the clock a little bit and look about the reason Donald Trump was elected in the first place. Globalization has caused massive dislocations within the world. We've seen huge amounts of money transfer from the poor to the rich. And in fact, just today, I left Mayfair in the morning. We went down to Clacton and visited what is the poorest part of England, in a place called Jaywick. It's overlooked. It's a shambolic place. And the contrast between Mayfair and that area that was, utterly just hollowed out, to be frank. And it takes us where we joined the Trump story in Mississippi, where we were asked to go down, or Nigel was asked to go down and speak in Jackson, Mississippi. And 20,000 people came out to listen to Donald Trump and to listen to Farage, and there were another 20,000 queued down the road. And the reason was that, in essence, they were disappointed with the political class and the fact, I think Conrad mentioned all the economic stats, but the only one you need to know is a salary of a normal American have flatlined for over 8 years. The communities were hollowed out. And so Donald Trump was a response, a kind of almost anti-political response. Now, I would agree with some of the comments of the previous speaker. He's a deeply flawed candidate, a deeply flawed president. But what he represents is a catalyst. And I don't think that Donald Trump will make America great again. I think the people of America will. And when we look at the major policies, which is to bring back jobs into America, to look at how you could change the tax system to actually bring companies back in, there's something like $2 trillion parked offshore out of America because the tax system of America means that corporation tax there is 38%, the highest in the Western world. And I think he's got a whole range of policies that will be very beneficial. But I think we have to see it in the context. The same as Brexit. Why did Brexit happen? People in London didn't see it coming because they didn't go out and look. If you actually look at what's happened to communities in our country, they've been hollowed out. And actually it was a reaction from the poorest in our society that thought that the politicians and the sort of corporations, it just wasn't in their benefit. And I think that's very much where Donald Trump has come in. I think, I watched the French election and Macron's going to win. I can tell you, if the entire British establishment line up and say, pick that guy and not Marie Le Pen, in the same way that everybody lined up against Trump, there's going to be big trouble. And don't rule it out. So I think from my perspective, it's not a question of whether Donald Trump will make America great again. It's whether he will free up Americans to once again make America great again. And that's my key point I had to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Aaron Banks. Now, speaking secondly against the motion, Trump is making America great again, is Anne Applebaum, American journalist and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian. She's a regular columnist on the Washington Post and is also a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, where she runs a program on disinformation and 21st century propaganda. Anne, please make your way to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to start by saying I'm terribly sorry. No, Mr. Black, no, Mr. Banks. Trump is not making America great again. You've been conned. It was amusing to hear Conrad Black speak about facts. This is not a president who respects facts. We already know by now that he's lied to his supporters, he's lied to the people in the heartlands who voted for him. He has not kept any of the legislative promises that he made for his first 100 days, and yes, he did make them. They're on a piece of paper, you can find them. He may never keep them. We know that his populism was a total farce. His allegiance is not to the people who elected him, or his allegiance is to the billionaires and to the lobbyists and to Wall Street and to the people who filled his cabinet and who run much of his White House, and above all, his allegiance is to himself. We know that he spent more time golfing in his first 100 days than the previous 4 occupants of the White House put together. We know he spends even more time watching cable television because since he doesn't have the attention span to read or listen to briefings, he tweets and makes policy in response to whatever he sees. We also know that he will do profound damage to American democracy, as you've heard already from Mr. Khan. But Trump has already done really profound damage to America's reputation around the world as an ally, as a trading partner, and even as a serious country. And this is going to get worse, and it's going to get much worse. Every day, the incoherence deepens. He's never going to intervene in Syria, he says, but then he saw, or perhaps Ivanka saw, pictures of dead children on television, and he changed his mind. He's going to get Mexico to pay for a wall, but actually it will cost $12 to $15 billion of US taxpayers' money. He has a secret plan to defeat ISIS, but actually his strategy is no different from Obama's. He's going to challenge China on trade, on Taiwan, but now he isn't. He's going to make friends with Russia, but after the press exposed his campaign's deep connections to Russia, he's decided, for the moment at least, to drop that idea. He's unable to name the leader of North Korea with whom he would like to tussle, against whom he appears to want to go to war. He claimed to have sent an aircraft towards the Korean peninsula, but actually it was heading in the opposite direction. He had dinner with the Chinese dictator and then offended South Korea, who our allies were defending, by declaring incorrectly that Korea actually used to be part of China. He lies repeatedly about crowd sizes, about wiretapping, about his campaign team's relationship with Russian officials, about the crime rate, about employment figures, about the trade deficit. He's lied about what he said he would do. He's lied to his supporters. He insults our allies, not only South Korea, but Mexico, Australia, Germany, Sweden, while fawning over dictators like Sisi and Erdogan, especially if he owns property in their countries. Teams of people, the Defense Secretary of the United States, the Vice President, have to be sent around the world to apologize for the foolish statements that Trump has made, but everybody knows it doesn't really help. Every day he is teaching our allies, and they are learning, that we will not stand up for them, that the American president's word cannot be trusted. Since taking office, Trump has never displayed the remotest concern for American national interests or for American values, or indeed for most Americans. But he is obsessively interested in his own business. He's refused to separate himself from his companies, which are nominally run by his sons, or from the multiple conflicts of interest that they represent all over the world. Where does this leave us? America used to fight kleptocracy. This was actually a policy of the US government. But now America is becoming a kleptocracy. American governments used to encourage others to be more transparent. This was part of our foreign policy, was to encourage our partners and our allies around the world to increase transparency. America used to stand for democracy, but now America stands for nepotism. As a nation, our ability to influence others and shape the world has long derived not just from military and economic power, but from the power of our ideas and from the solidity of our system. All of that's gone. So no, America is not being made great. America is being made corrupt and inconsequential and tawdry and laughable by Donald Trump, who is the most dishonest, most venal, and most malevolent president that we've had in living memory. Thank you.
We've heard from our speakers, and before we go to the audience, let me tell you your thinking before the start of this Intelligence Squared debate. Our motion, Trump is making America great again. For the motion, 13%, 13%. Against the motion, 67%. And the don't knows, 20%. So you've got a lot of persuading to do, gentlemen. Let's see what happens when the members of the audience are polled again after they've listened to what you all have to say, to see if you've managed to influence the people here. So we've seen how you voted before the debate. Let's now go to the audience, see if they have any comments or questions to our panelists. And can I see hands, please? We'll start with the lady there. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I'm one of the undecided. And if anything, was prepared to want to actually agree with the motion. But I am undecided because Mr. Trump hasn't done half the things that I wanted him to do. But the best thing that he ever did say when he became president was he was not going to allow America to judge other nations, and that he wanted to create a nation in America that was so inspirational that people would want to copy him, that he wouldn't be telling them, America wouldn't be telling everybody else how to behave.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
So my question was just for the gentleman supporting the motion is, what is it that he's doing to make America great.
So, how is Trump putting the great back into the United States of America?
Of course, it is a great nation, and it has never ceased to be a great nation, at least since the end of the U.S. Civil War. So we're really talking about reversing the decline of it, which I tried to describe in economic terms, though it occurs in other ways. It's now the first time in American history that the life expectancy of an American has declined. It's not chronic, as in Russia and Ukraine, but it's declined by 1 month. While I'm at it, if I may, without filibustering, the Mexican wall will be built. It will be built, Keyser. He's called for bids on it, and I think historians of the future will be absolutely incredulous that the United States tolerated 12 to 15 million completely illegally unskilled people to enter their country. It would be like between 2 and 3 million people suddenly arriving here, not speaking the language and not having any skills to make a living. I mean, he wants immigration, he'll have it, but he wants it to be legal.
Keyes' point, I think, was
and by the way, Mexico will pay
for
for it because he is going to alter the trade agreement.
America has immigration laws. America does not have immigration policy. Instead of building wall, America should develop immigration policy.
The wall is a silly metaphor. The wall will not stop anything. The wall doesn't change policy. It's another one, it's a classic Trump way of doing policy. Create a fake project, get energy done around it, and actually it will achieve nothing.
Thank you. If I can get more questions. If I can get more questions. Thank you. Take some more questions from the floor, please. Who's got the microphone?
Anne Applebaum said that the American people have been conned by Trump. I'd suggest that the American people have been conned by the left-wing journalists at the Washington Post and the New York Times. For example, they were saying on the election night that it was 98% certain that Hillary was going to get elected. Now that's a con job for a start. Now this is the left-wing media, which is not telling the liberal intelligentsia here, for example, that America's working class, America's poor, are fed up with globalization, they're fed up with the divisive identity politics, and what they're looking for from left-wing journalists is some understanding of what's going on, why people are so unhappy that they vote for Trump. So instead of just this endless hatred of Trump, why isn't there some reflection going on about why left-wing journalists got it so wrong at the Post and at the New York Times?
Okay, fine. But do remember, very, very quickly,
I used to work for Conrad Black's Spectator and then for his Daily Telegraph. So I didn't think I count as a left-wing journalist.
So centre-left, centre-right there. Yeah, okay. Oh, centre-right publications, at least, that you worked for. Thank you.
Presuming that Mr. Trump has one, where do you think his moral compass points?
Okay. Thank you. Yep.
First of all, Donald Trump is clearly against science. He said that the MMR vaccine causes autism, which is not true, and he's also against climate change. The thing is that when civilizations deny science, they've often fallen. So how will you deal with this?
It's for both sides. I was wondering, since the beginning of the Trump administration, would you say that tension and hostility between the two parties is at its worst? Or would you argue that there's more bridge builders in Congress, even with like a united government?
Okay, let's just take a couple of questions. Where is Donald Trump's moral compass? Conrad or Aaron?
I mean, Anne, I don't think you know Donald, or you don't know him well. I've known him for over 20 years, and his moral compass is that he's a very loyal friend. He had a perfect record as an equal opportunity employer. He's been in rough businesses. He's not a genteel businessman, and he's the only businessman who's ever been the president, but he is a man whose word is absolutely reliable. We had him as co-developer in Chicago. He came in right on budget, right on time. And when I had my legal difficulties, he volunteered to come and testify for me. And he is a loyal friend, and not to be compared to many of our other neighbors who have miraculously recovered from this amnesia, but many of whom forgot my telephone number for 10 years. He has his limitations and he has his infelicities, and they grate on me as much as I'm sure they do on you. But he should not be described in these outrageous terms. He has achieved a completely unprecedented feat in being the only person in the history of the United States who never sought a political office, never had a military command, and took over from outside, first a political party and then the government. He did it because the people knew that they had suffered from 15 years of chronic misgovernment. And he has a program to put it through, and you can't do it in 100 days.
Okay, thank you. Aaron, just picking up...
I just wanted to go back to something Anna said earlier, which was America's going down the track of nepotism, yet she wanted to install Hillary Clinton after Bill Clinton, probably the most corrupt people in the United States of America. So I think from that point of view, that's very wrong.
Oh, just by the way, I'm sure they would not regard themselves as the most corrupt people in the United States.
The American public had a clear binary choice. They chose Donald Trump. What does it say about your party that they discarded this wonderful party that was right on all the issues and voted for Donald Trump? But the final thing I wanted to say, because I didn't say very much at the lectern, was the left-wing journalism in America. And we've just seen a string of news that is just basically demeaning of the fact that he's been president for 100 days. What the hell? I mean, what are you going to do in 100 days? He's tried to repeal Obamacare. He's bringing forward tax policies, and he's probably the only politician in the history of the world that's actually trying to deliver his promises.
Anne Applebaum, if you want to respond to that, but also to remember some of the questions that we've been given, in particular from the little boy about Trump being against science.
He doesn't even know what he promised. He doesn't understand Obamacare. He says we're going to have great health care. It's going to be great for everyone. Everyone's going to have lots of it. It's going to be really cheap. And then a few days later, somebody maybe gives him one of those papers with bullet points on it and lots of pictures, and he says, oh, I didn't realize healthcare, who knew healthcare could be so complicated?
Obamacare.
I mean, this is a man who has no concept of what it would take to reform healthcare. He doesn't have anything at all. This is a vapid, utterly vapid presidency.
Thank you. Let's go to the floor, please. Yes?
I had a question for Conrad Black, with his hat on as writer and historian, if you like. Thinking back over the latter part of the 20th century, I can think of two other American presidents who in this country have been ridiculed and laughed at by journalists and others. Richard Nixon, who had at his side Henry Kissinger, and was an American president who opened the door to China. President Reagan, who had Schultz by his side, as Secretary of State, who was responsible partly for the end of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism. I don't know if Trump is making America great, but I ask this. He does appear to understand what a red line is. The former president didn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Chap next to you.
I think either just after he got elected or just before, Trump said he was going to do a special deal with the UK, a trade deal. We were at the top of the queue. I hear now that he's changed his mind because Angela Merkel wouldn't do a deal with him. Is this yet another example of him flip-flopping? I just thought, Aaron Banks, you might have a view on that.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another one.
I agree with you that any politician or president needs time to make changes, but given that he's infuriated the judiciary, infuriated the media, and possibly more importantly, infuriated the CIA, do you think he'll be a Nixon or a Kennedy?
Right. At first, Trump said that the UK will be at the front of the queue, and then now it's the EU who are ahead in terms of the trade deal.
I mean, the article I read in the Sunday Times was attributed to an unnamed source, as usual. There was no actual there was no source for that story. We know from our contacts with the American administration that they prioritise a trade deal with Britain. So I just don't know where that story's come from. What I do know is the media's awash with misleading, bad fake news. I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't one of them.
Conrad Black, we had the question about whether Trump was going to be a Nixon or a Kennedy, and also Nixon resigned before he was impeached, but I guess that's what the Speaker's asking. CIA and the media, he says, are against him. Is he going to be a Nixon or a Kennedy?
Not in the senses you mean, no. By the way, after all these years, there's not a scrap of evidence that Mr. Nixon broke any laws. I mean, people did in the Republican National Committee and in the White House staff.
I'm just giving the background. Sure. What about the question then about...
in that question, I believe, was the comment that he had infuriated the media. You don't understand in this country that it's a war. He attacked the media because it was misreporting everything, in effect, and he was substantially right. And he has got around the media with the social media and with his friends in the talk show business. Rush Limbaugh has 5 times as many listeners every day as the New York Times has readers. And it has worked. But let us remember that for 32 years, from 1981 to 2013, one member or other of the Bush or Clinton families was president, vice president, or secretary of state. If you want nepotism, that was it. He ran against those families and the Obamas, and they were just passing the offices back and forth between them.
Can we answer the questions? And then the one about 2 presidents who were disliked in Europe, Nixon and Reagan, and were they underestimated, and at least Trump understands a red line. That was that question to you particularly.
But is it not true?
I think that most people now, even in this country, would acknowledge that Reagan in particular and Nixon were capable presidents. And I think ultimately, if you people all come back in 8 years, you'll say the same about Donald.
Okay,
sorry, the one last thing I was going to say was that Reagan's first 100 days was very unpleasant. You know, he had a whole deal of problems, and in fact, probably just as tumultuous as Trump. So I think you can't judge a presidency by the first 100 days objectively.
All right. Keisa, do you want to come in at all on these?
Somebody had asked about the moral compass. Yes, Trump has moral compass. That is self-promotion. His moral compass is political expediency. Say whatever helps you for the moment, regardless of how it will be changed when the circumstances, when the time change. I have stood in front of Trump voters. I have answered their questions. Where are the jobs we were promised? Where is health care we were promised? We don't see this in sight. We were promised things will change immediately. When I get in the office, you will have jobs and thousands of jobs and all that. That is political expediency, misleading people. And he did not win that election. The facts are worth looking into. He won the election because of the Electoral College. He did not win the popular votes.
Okay.
Never forget that.
Thank you. We'll go to more questions from the floor. Yes.
I have a question for the 4 proponents, or the proponents of the motion. I would like to know how you would reconcile the idea of bringing back jobs for the downtrodden working class that Mr. Black mentioned, for making America, the land of opportunity again, with the incredible wealth that is concentrated in the White House and the cabinet.
Thank you. Any more ladies in the audience? Can I just see, because we've had an awful lot of chaps. Yes, there's a young lady there.
This is mainly directed to the motion. When do you think America was ever great?
Okay, thank you. Another one. Yeah.
It seems that Donald Trump is not an analytical person, which, as we pointed out, Ronald Reagan, other presidents were not analytical or intuitive and did well. But my question is, who's going to be driving the agenda going in these next 4 years? Since he's not the person that has a clear strategy. We know there are a few groups. I would like the panel to try to answer this question.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me give to the for the motion side. How do you reconcile helping the downtrodden with the fact that it's the wealthiest cabinet in the White House? And also, when was America ever great?
Well, I think tackling the wealthy cabinet I mean, these are some of America's greatest business people in the White House, which is, I think, a phenomenal thing. And I think the plan is they're going to reduce corporation tax, they're going to make a very friendly, business-friendly environment for America, and they will bring back jobs, and they're going to look to create a growth rate of 3 or 4% rather than the anemic 1% or less that they've been experiencing. So I think that this idea that just because they're rich, they're going to somehow do things to their benefit, if anything, they don't have a vested interest. They're already rich.
Thank you. Can they reconcile the two?
Look, we were promised, what was the term used? Cleaning the swamp?
Draining the swamp.
Draining the swamp. The swamp has gotten worse. Look at the cabinet. Look at the appointments. We were told there will be transparency. Has anybody seen his tax records? And there is a reason he doesn't want to share the tax record, because that is where lies the foreign influence of the foreign banks. That is where lies the reason that's such a collusion between Russia and Donald Trump and his advisors. He will not show. So forget about jobs, forget about, this is going to be self-promotion every step.
Who's driving the agenda is a fascinating question. We don't really know. We know who his advisors in theory are. We know who he's supposed to be listening to. But it seems to change from week to week. He was listening to Steve Bannon. Now apparently he's not. He listens quite a lot to his son-in-law, who, as I said, has no experience in any of these issues and no knowledge of them because he trusts family members. If we're lucky, and this is a very strange statement if you think about it, if we're lucky, he will listen to the many generals that he's appointed to important jobs, because they at least have this sense of what America is and what America can be and what it should do abroad and what it should stand for. General Mattis and General McMaster at the National Security Council. But it is a very, very odd moment in American history where we have something almost like, and I don't even know that it's negative, we have a kind of soft military takeover. We are now really reliant on our generals to keep making the daily decisions that will keep American foreign policy ticking over. And if we're lucky, that will happen.
Okay. I'll just take 2 or 3 more questions, please. Can I see? Yep. Carry on.
We haven't had the luxury to know Mr. Trump for 20 years like Conrad Black has, but we've had the opportunity to hear him speak and read his tweets. A gentleman before mentioned red lines and that Trump is someone that has red lines. I question whether he has red lines when it comes to behavior, and I would put forward that the presidency has a certain gravitas, it has a certain professionalism, and that's important. It's hard to quantify the impact of that, but I would ask what your view is. I personally think that he's cheapened that somewhat, and I would be interested in hearing what you think of that and the importance of that gravitas.
Yes, I think he's cheapened it enormously. And leave aside what he did for the previous several decades. I mean, it's true, I don't know Trump personally as Conrad does, and I don't make my judgments about politicians on those grounds in any case. But his use of insult, his lies, his attacks on Twitter, his bizarre self-contradictions which happen from one day to the next, his unseemly use of his own properties to entertain people, his unseemly use of the Secret Service to fund those properties. I mean, all of that, I think, has really brought down the prestige of the presidency in a way that's going to be very, very hard to recover.
I think we can resolve many of the differences here in the room by saying if we are right, Aaron and I, that he will put his program through, there will be economic growth, and it will address a great many of the problems of the vulnerable people in the country. If he can get his program through, his program will work. If he can't get it through, he'll be a failure. So we just have to wait and see. And all the talking by him or any of us isn't going to be a substitute for whether he can actually deliver and be a successful president. But Donald is not as he appears. But that's how he appears, and I agree. It does dilute the gravity and distinction of that very great office, and I don't like it either.
Keys is shaking his head there.
I apologize. Which Trump are you talking about? The one that insulted women by grabbing their private parts? That Trump? Shame on him then, shame on him now. That is the Trump that this world knows.
All right. All right, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've had the debate, but before I announce the final vote to see who's won this debate, let me remind you of how you, the audience, voted before you heard our speakers today. So, the pre-debate results. For the motion, Trump is making America great again. For the motion, 13%, against 67%, don't know 20%. And the final results of this Intelligence Squared debate, for the motion, 20%, against the motion, 76%, and the don't know, 4%. So congratulations to against the motion, you won. You also enjoyed the greatest swing. Thank you very much indeed to our panel, Conrad Black, Aaron Banks, Anne Applebaum and Kiza Khan. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you to our audience and to all our viewers, wherever you've been watching this, and of course to Intelligence Squared for making this possible. From me, Zainab Badawi, goodbye.